So we've got boss.
Cool. You'll have to pass me those. Cool. We've got a quorum in the room. Kia kara kia tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta. Ki mā taratara ki tai. Ehi ki ani ana. Ehi aki ana. Te atakura. He tio. He huka. He hauhu. Tihei mauri ora. Morena everyone, and thank you for coming to our Policy and Planning Committee for, what is the date? The 12th of June. The year is going quickly. We have a fairly full agenda today, so we will do our best to get through it in an efficient way. We have absence apparently from no one. We have lateness from Councillor Foley, who's coming in online, lateness from Councillor Leone on council business. We have the Mayor on council business to start, and he is leaving to the early departure as well that Councillor Henderson is on, same council business for both of them. And we do the electronics next. Can I have a mover?
It always depends on what time, but Councillor Stewart and I will put an apology in for early departure about 3 or 3:30.
Yeah, let's just get it done before
If you finished at 3:30, it won't be an early departure.
Early departure.
I'm not staying on until 3:30.
And Councillor Sayers has to leave at around 2 o'clock.
So who moved it?
Who moved it? I'll say Councillor Williamson moved it. Deputy Chair second. All those in favour? I've got a number of, is it just those three still? Okay, so the attendance by electronic link, got Councillor Leone, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Foley, both standing order 3.3.3A, sorry that's for Leone and Foley, and Fletcher is on B. So can I have a mover? Councillor Sayers, seconder, Deputy Chair. All those in favour? Any opposed? No. Right, are there any declarations of interest? No. Awesome. Confirmation of the minutes. Mover, Deputy Chair, Dalton, seconder, Deputy Mayor, Simpson. All those in favour? And, those are for both 15th and 22nd? Cool. There are no petitions. There was public input request from Boopsy Moran for on standing orders and public input policy, but that sits under the terms of reference for governing body, so has been deferred to governing body. There is no local board input. There are no extraordinary items that I know of. And now we move to items 8. I've got Richard, but are we going to say both at once? Yeah, cool. We're going to do item 8 and 9. They'll look separate through the presentation. We're going to do them together and debate them together as they are connected, but they are different. So we'll talk about, we've got Richard and Nick and Marina together. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you for coming today. Who's going to kick off? Nick, kia ora.
Tēnā rau atu kia koe te tiamana, tēnā te mihi atu kia koe moto karakia I arehia I amatuma I tēnei rā, kia koutou katoa, aku rangatira I arehi tō mātou hapori tēnei ka mihi atu. Just in the spirit of the 3:30 deadline, I'll keep this relatively brief, but I did want to introduce this piece of work. This is really important work for us. The Tamaki Makaurau, the Kia ora Tamaki Makaurau framework is a really strategic piece of work for us that helps lead the work that we do with our Māori communities. And also the Māori Outcomes Fund, there was a directive from the Mayor in the LTP around having a review around this fund. So we're bringing this work back to you. Just a note that this has been done under the leadership and guidance of the Māori Political Working Group. So just an acknowledgement to Councillor Leone and those that sit on that board. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to introduce Marina Matthews, who's been leading the Tamaki Ora, Kia ora Tamaki Makaurau refresh, and Richard Court, who's been leading the Māori Outcomes Review. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marina.
Ngā mihi, kia koutou katoa.
So without further ado, as the Chair and Nick had mentioned, we're going to go through a brief presentation on both of the papers, which is asking the committee for the decisions set out on the screen there. I'm going to take the presentation as read and just emphasise or highlight, clarify 4 of the slides with regards to tamaki order. So, first of all, Kia ora Tamaki Makaurau has been the Māori outcomes framework for the past 5 years. It didn't necessarily have a time frame or a statutory requirement to review it, but we thought that it was timely given what has happened since the previous one with COVID and various storms in Tamaki Makaurau. So we did a refresh. One of the things about the refresh is that we've engaged quite extensively with mana whenua, Māori communities, mātā waka. So it's not merely a council-centric document. We've engaged with over 335 individuals. Personally, Ngā Mātarai has engaged with, to date, 14 mana whenua and a couple of mātā waka, but haukura, and when they presented to us their he whenua makaurau, they had engaged with each of the mana whenua. We're still meeting with various mana whenua in the coming weeks, but we had our partners who had gone out and engaged with over 13,000 rangatahi, young student leaders, takatapui, Māori women leaders, people in the community around their thoughts, aspirations and goals for Auckland Council, as well as specifically in any Māori outcomes strategy. So based on our own engagement, as well as hearing from iwi themselves, we looked at over 700 feedback or submissions from Māori entities and to local boards, to the LTP submission process. Many of you were on the budget committee that had heard from 3 particular mātā waka representatives themselves individually. So we went through all of that as part of a desktop exercise as well. And then we produced what we think is a representation of Māori outcomes, priorities and goals, and we've set it out in tamaki order. So one thing that you'll see there is we've reduced the mana outcomes from 10 to 7. These outcomes predominantly are focused on the areas that Auckland Council can statutorily have the greatest impact for not only Māori, but for community within Auckland going forward. We've also got 3 enabling support functions just down the bottom there, which are the foundations. This is kind of the internal Auckland Council focused aspect of the strategy, but it's around ourselves as a council being able to strengthen our own capability and build those foundational partnerships with Māori and iwi, as well as ensuring that we are enabling Māori outcomes. I also wanted to emphasise the performance measurement aspect of the framework. So the framework does 2 things. One, it sets out a strategy, but then it also sets out some performance measures for council to be able to adhere to so that it can be delivering impact and outcomes for Māori. We've adopted a theory of change approach, which is an evaluative approach that looks at not just the inputs, which was what one could say about Kia ora tamaki makaurau, but it also looks at the outputs as well as having a target. So I just thought I'd talk you through an example, as this one relates to the Māori Outcomes Fund in particular, with marae order. So one of the proposed measures there is that there are a number of marae that are receiving physical upgrades, compliance support, or support for planning projects and events and activations. So what this means is that Auckland Council is able to support marae infrastructure development so that it is able to have marae as a thriving part of our Auckland Council, our Tamaki Makaurau landscape. The other aspect of the performance measurement framework is not just about delivering performance measures and meeting those targets. It's around using a raft of various tools in order to be able to demonstrate the impact for Māori. So you'll see up there on the left, the right, is the performance measurement framework. So that's just one part of what it is that the shift that we're trying with Tamaki Order to demonstrate impact, outcome and value for Māori. We're also going to use the Achieving Māori Outcomes plans, the AMO plans, within each of the departments, as well as within the CCOs. We're also going to use storytelling and evaluation, which will be finalised and come to the Policy and Planning Committee as part of the Māori Outcomes Annual Report, which is due to come to you in August this year. We'll also be looking at the Māori perspectives across the organisation. So today we're talking about the Māori Outcomes Strategy, but all of this is within the wider Auckland Council strategy, which is currently, there's a mayoral directive along with councillors to look at the group strategic framework, which is streamlining all the performance measurement outcomes. So this is just a snapshot of the Māori outcomes related measures that are within that wider framework.
Morena, similar to Marina, I will be just sort of pointing out a few key points per slide. So really what I'd like to convey through the presentation and the paper are sort of a few key points. Firstly, that the Māori Outcomes Fund, in sort of answering the request for a review, we're looking at making the fund more accessible externally and with an emphasis on partnership and co-investment. There will be greater transparency in bringing funding decisions to a committee, so that's within your paper today. Also, greater clarity on how the fund can be used to support marae in general, because that's been a point that we've been asked to look at throughout a number of different conversations, and also just making the point that the fund will be used to achieve an equity of outcomes as opposed to necessarily an equity of inputs, so kind of equal funding. Just to look at the proposed revised governance. So what we're proposing is that we want to sort of mimic the what you see as comes through the Regional Facilities and Investment Fund. So that's a fund that is of similar sort of complexity and level of funding to the Māori Outcomes Fund. In terms of a process, so we will be coming back to you with criteria and all the sort of finer detail, but just at a high level, the process will be that we ask for expressions of interest from our external partners, so that's Mana Whenua Mata Waka, and that we will continue to support initiatives that come through the council that are co-designed with Māori or Māori-led through our existing investment delivery framework. The assessment process will be governed, or will be conducted, by staff. We'll be looking for how the fund is used in the context of operational budgets and other LTP budgets. So this is really about making sure that the fund is performing a distinct role as opposed to being perhaps dipped into from sort of multiple points. We'll also be bringing to you a multi-year investment plan, recognising that obviously the Māori Outcomes Fund spans the LTP and really from FY28. At the moment there is significant unallocated funding. So staff recommendations will come to you through a panel led by Nick, and we'll do that really as soon as possible in the new council term. Just turning to marae specifically, we have developed just a few sort of guiding principles that, again, we will need to wrap into the actual sort of finer detail of criteria and so forth. But I just wanted to sort of pick on the final one of those bullet points, which talks about building relationships between mana whenua and mātā waka marae. So what we've said in the paper is that there is a clear need to recognise the different contexts that marae operate in. We're aware of situations where, you know, for the sort of sake of a greater clarity or a relationship between mana whenua and mātā waka marae, there would be a greater understanding of what marae investment entails. So if it's for a new marae or the expansion of a marae, again, we need to look at making sure that mana whenua have sort of endorsed that expansion, or that's what we're proposing. The sort of translation of that into action, we have a marae infrastructure programme that is currently funding the 32 marae that's contained in the appendix on your paper. We've made our way through quite a considerable number of those, but that programme will run until FY29. We are looking at, again, back to the sort of funding for equity of outcome. We're looking at the potential to revisit some of those marae that we weren't able to bring up to a particular standard. We're also looking to expand the Cultural Initiatives Fund from its current sort of definition to include things like the activation of marae, digital infrastructure, and potentially maintenance for systems for compliance. So that is where we've got some marae that we've needed to put things like fire systems into, where they don't currently have the ability to perhaps maintain those and therefore comply with their building consent. So in all our work, in terms of marae, we're conscious of the different contexts that marae work in. We think that an expression of interest process will help us to have a conversation up front about what is the outcome that's sought, how might council play a role, if at all, and how might we develop things like partnerships and co-investment into that. So really the next steps are for us to focus on the iwi order and marae order and community priorities that are outlined in the Tamaki order framework. We will complete the in-flight projects that, again, are listed in the attachment to your report, and we will focus on building that pipeline, because I think there's some intensive work that we need to do to really clarify the priorities and the role that council can play in those priorities. And we will then bring back revised guidelines and advice for you as soon as possible in FY26.
Kia ora, thank you so much. I know this body of work has been many briefings, drop-ins, workshops, hours and hours of work for staff, especially with that wide engagement and consultation. So thank you so much. I will go to Deputy Mayor first, who has some questions.
Morena, thank you very much. My question is not so much specifically on the strategy, it's more a bit broader. So whilst the Tamaki Order draft strategy aimed at specifically improving outcomes for Māori, and obviously supported by the fund, which is, I don't know, with the next item or together or whatever. Can you discuss how the focus and the investment will benefit all Aucklanders, please?
Thanks for your question, Councillor. In a broad sense, we know that our investment into wider community benefits have a knock-on benefit for Māori, and I would suggest to you that our investment into these Māori initiatives will also have that knock-on benefit for the wider community as well. So from a practical perspective, if we look at things that we have invested in the past, such as the economic hubs of Te Puna or Te Ngāhere, these are embedded in our communities where they're actually helping a broader range of the community. Things like our environment projects, such as Tūmai Taonga out on Aotea, is looking after one of our most valuable biodiversity assets that we have in Tāmaki Makaurau. And even things like our marae programs that were, really valuable assets during our floods as hubs of services that actually helped a lot of people in need at those particular time. What I'd also say about this is that the Tāmaki Order Framework is a measuring framework, so it measures the output and outcome. It's not in a vacuum of work. It actually is across the wide breadth of work that we're doing. It's just that we're specifically targeting on these outcomes that will benefit for our communities. It is, of course, within a wider range of work that the Auckland Council delivers for our entire communities.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And for, sorry, Councillor Filipaina wasn't on my list, but he did text me and Angela yesterday, so my fault for not ensuring. You're already in the meeting, Councillor Filipaina, but we'll just get the meeting to vote on it. I'll move and Deputy Chair will second for online attendance, Standing Order 3.3.3a. All those in favour? Aye. And welcome Councillor Filipaina, who's already in the room anyway. Kia ora. Sorry about that. Back to the substantive. Councillor Leone online, you'd like a question, and thank you for all your work chairing a lot of this mahi. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou, and aroha mai that I can't be there in person, and acknowledge all the mahi that has gone into this work that you've done. Look, my question is just around the accessibility across Tāmaki Makaurau, and with the review and the framework that's been done, do you feel that there's going to be more of an opportunity for communities across our city to be able to access more funding?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. As it sort of states in the paper, the process to date has been that that the projects that are funded through the Māori Outcomes Fund come through our directorates as the first port, and then they come to us for decisions. The adoption of an expressions of interest process means that there'll be a little bit more transparency over where the money is going to our community, so they can see that, but also offer them the opportunity to put forward bids. Through that assessment process, that then comes back to you for that substantive decision as to where that funding goes. So yes, we're confident that it will mean more access to a wider breadth of community to this funding.
Ka pai, ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Councillor. Member Ashby.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just congratulations on some really important and excellent work. So, ngā mihi to you and the team. Just a couple of questions from me. You note in the report that there are some risks just on readiness and capability across the council whānau to kind of implement it. So, I guess in terms of the phased rollout and I guess implementation, what might that look like? Just as one question. Then the other question I have is, and I think it's amazing that this is more outcome focused and there's some good KPIs around that. Just in terms of the monitoring and reporting back of that, what might that look like? Let's say, kia ora.
Through the chair. Thank you very much, Member Ashby. So with regards to your question around the rollout, so some may think that all the work has been done now that we've actually got the strategy and the performance measurement framework, but actually from an Auckland Council perspective, we now need to ensure that we have a couple of things. We have a change management process so that staff understand, know, and how and can align their work with it. We also need to have a communications plan, not only within internally, which includes to our local board members, but also externally. We need to go back to mana whenua and Māori communities that we had heard from during the development of Tamaki Order and let them know and close that loop. We also need to look at having a capability or a training process with regards to staff. So we'll be doing that over the next 6 months. So that hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate to the Policy and Planning Committee when we next come back that we have put this rollout in place. We'll also be taking an update to the governing body and the Haukura quarterly meetings as well. With regards to your questions around the monitoring and reporting, as you had identified, one of the key shifts is now the focus on the outputs, the outcomes, the values, the impact to Māori. This is quite a change from how Auckland Council has measured or delivered or enabled Māori outcomes before. So we don't expect it to happen overnight. There will be a full rollout with regards to the Achieving Māori Outcomes plans, the AMO plans, which all of our 33 departments and the 4 CCOs currently have. We'll also be extending the type of monitoring and reporting and evaluation that we do. And I think I had mentioned that we will collate all of that and bring it back to the Policy and Planning Committee in August and each year onwards as part of the annual report for Māori outcomes.
Great, thank you.
Kia ora, Member Ashby. Councillor Sayers.
And thank you for the presentation, and yes, congratulations, all the good work and important work that you've achieved. I had 2 questions, Chair. The first was around, I had a strong impression at the beginning of the presentation about the number of people you'd engaged with and some new avenues there. So I just wanted confirmation, had you done something new there to increase your reach, to engage with more people, and was that an increase or not? And related to that, going forward, in terms of your ability to stay in contact with those groups, and if they're new contacts, just your ability to continue to get input and feedback from them to help update us. So that's the first question. The second question is just perhaps a little bit more into the tactics around the strategy around Marae, development of Marae, and I don't know if you can answer it now. It could come back to me around, I'm particularly interested in a Marae, my area in Rodney at Glorit. I don't know if that's in scope or not, but when I've ever been to that Marae, I've kind of been asked about the roading in and out of that Marae, and I don't know if that's, been alerted to you or is in scope for future work with them. And it could be a private road, I'm not quite sure if it's Auckland Transport or on private land. Yeah.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor. I'm not too sure if we had done something different from what had previously happened, but one of the things that we had noted when we'd been doing the desktop review was just the breadth of submissions that are already received by Auckland Council with regards to Māori outcomes. And it's not necessarily just Māori communities or Māori entities, but it's broader than that. So we had done a stakeholder engagement exercise as part of Tamaki Order, as well as the review of Māori Outcomes Fund. And for example, we did have 3 of the Mātāwaka entity groups who came and presented to you at the budget, including Rainbow Youth, Tornui Consulting and Mad Avenue. So that was an opportunity for us to be able to bring in wider voices and perspectives. But also we made a point of listening to mana whenua about the various breadth and range that of folk that they engage with, and we took their lead as well.
You also mentioned about engaging in the classrooms as well. Was that new or something that can be continued?
Through the chair, yes. So I understand that, for example, Megan's local elections group and governance are using the same approach with regards to civics education of rangatahi around and getting them involved to be able to vote once they come of age, and the importance of having that civics understanding. So we utilise that process as well.
Through the chair, just to answer your second question, in a broad sense, the opening the Cultural Initiatives Fund and shifting it to an expressions of interest process does mean that marae and cultural centres, are able to look at the fund and go through a criteria process. So in that regards, perhaps there might be avenues. Just noting, of course, and very aware of that community, recent programs have been carried out and delivered at Te Kiora Marae as well as Aroha, Te Aroha Marae. Aware that there's work that's needed to be done at Puatahi, but perhaps you and I can have an offline conversation around how we might progress some of those outputs for that community.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Bartley.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and the work. My question is there enough in the pie so that we're not pitting mana whenua marae development against Matawaka urban marae development? I ask this question because I'm still, supporting our Pōtaka marae, urban marae in Glen Innes for their upgrade, but it's taking a long time, so I don't want to see them fall behind with our new mana whenua coming through.
Kia ora, Councillor. Through the Chair, thank you for the question. So we do have a significant marae infrastructure program budget that is available. So again, if we, looking at each individual marae, if we can assess what's required, and we can have a look at through that expression of interest process, what we can support. So there is sufficient funding within the LTP budget that's been provided.
Thanks, Councillor. Member Hirare.
Kia ora. Mea tutahi kei a koutou e korangatira tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou a koutou mahi mō tēnei item. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui nui. Before I ask my question, in the past, there's been a lot of disjointed work done. And this time, everybody's in the tent, and we can all claim that it is our report, our mahi. So big ups to your team and everybody else, to the Secretariat, blah 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 blah. Not to mention Mātāwaka and iwi Māori. Do you have, or did you have a return on investment sort of approach to this? I mean, what's in it for? What is the return for the council, Tāmaki? What's the return for Mātāwaka, for iwi? Did you have that sort of approach? What am I going to? If somebody got up at a meeting and said, "What's in it for me?" Would you be able to answer that?
Firstly, thank you for the accolades, gratefully accepted. Secondly, that's a really great question. And I think in this space, what we're trying to do with our measurements outcome is, provide a range of ways in which we could answer those questions with authority. Harking back to what Marina was sort of saying, our previous framework really did focus on inputs and maybe some outputs. This around inputs, outputs, impact and outcome will give us a better understanding and be able to answer with a little bit more authority of those questions. And I know that's kind of not answering the question by throwing a lot of words at you. So, but what I would say is that we have to think about what these social outcomes are. You know, our investment into maraes as cultural hubs for our communities that are able to deliver a number of services, that are able to be at hubs where social service deliveries are able to connect to their people and to work. You know, there's an immeasurable amount of outcomes that these things are able to do for our communities. And there is also, you know, a lot of things that are out there that we're able to track. You know, some of the stuff we're wanting to do inside our Auckland plan about making this Tāmaki Makaurau having a Māori identity and, you know, really promoting that, the tourism opportunities, all of those things. So while I can't give you an authoritative answer around what that return of investment looks like in a real tangible dollar figure or in a numerical sense, I guess what we're trying to shift to in this is a really more mature approach to measuring, so that at some stage we can bring that back to you inside our Māori Outcomes Report and give a greater sense to this council about the work that it's doing to lift our Māori communities.
And through the chair, I would just like to add our thanks to Haukura for being able to produce He Whenua Makaurau, the schedule of issues of significance, and also He Waka Kotoa, the Treaty of Waitangi audit, which you statutorily have to do every number of years, but that was also able to inform a lot of what Auckland Council's own Māori outcome strategy is, which from my perspective, I think it's helpful for us to be able to partner with Haukura to be able to use all of our resources and thinking power to be able to provide the best outcomes for Māori.
Great answer, thank you. Good question too. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Just on the back of Councillor Bartley, she asked if you had enough budget to. And you said you had plenty of budget. How much budget is it? Because, and how's it split?
Kia ora, Councillor, through the chair. So we provisioned within the Māori Outcomes Fund initially for a 60 million sort of allocation for across the 32 marae. We've currently been through about 20, upwards of sort of high 20s of that budget. Not including what we're currently delivering. So we do have a provision sort of annually of about 6 to 7 million for the next 3 years.
So I'm thinking of a specific situation in Te Atatu. So that 60 million's split between new establishment of marae and old marae that are there. Is that correct?
So that list, so the list of 32 that's in the report, that's the scope of the programme.
So, just my understanding, and if I understood Councillor Bartley right, she was asking really about iwi marae compared to Mātāwaka marae, if I was correct, and the split there. So do you have a way you make sure that's equitable?
Thanks for the question. So to date, those 32 maraes, they roughly work out 50 and 50 Mātāwaka and Mana Whenua maraes. To date, there's been, you know, the state of those. So what happened was an assessment, a building assessment was undertaken, and it just so meant that a small amount more money was going to Mātāwaka marae over the Mana Whenua marae. In the paper, we talk about equity of outcomes, so looking at ways in which we can make sure that we're getting the right outcome for each of the marae, rather than focusing on, hey, here's a dollar amount. It's actually about what is it for the marae that will mean, because a lot of the time for Mana Whenua marae, this was invested into, sunk into, you know, below ground infrastructure like water or ablutions and those kind of things. just to the second point that you're raising with regards to Mātāwaka marae, in particular with Te Atatu marae, there's inside that paper we also talk about how do we build those relationships with mana whenua as well as Mātāwaka, so that there's, I guess, real cohesion around what the outcome is, both for the Māori community as well as for mana whenua, and really sort of look at ways in which we can really promote people working together, because I know that there's sometimes friction around some of that stuff. Finally, with the cultural impact, the Cultural Investment Fund, that is, again, it's an expressions of interest process. It's open up. There's no cap on that, but it means that we'd be looking at any new investment that comes through, and then making an assessment based on the merits, and that assessment criteria will be coming back to this this committee at a later date.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that is all the... Oh, sorry, Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you. I did want to ask, in terms of the stronger focus on aligning council's work with Māori aspirations, what's been the feedback so far from like our senior management or executive in terms of the buy-in from all our departments to achieve these, what's in the refresh strategy?
Good. But to elaborate on that, the relationship with Māori is still a priority of our CEO's, and he reports on that through his back to governing body on a regular basis. It also features in our conversations with governing board and Haukura, and just being part of the executive leadership team in Kāhui Rangatira, I know that there is a lot of strong support. There has been a lot of investment with the recent change program that Phil led out in terms of building everyone's understanding of the relationships, the opportunity, and some of the issues that have happened in the past. So I'm very confident that Kāhui Rangatira, our general managers as well as our executive leadership team are on board and rearing to go.
And if I could add to the Tūmaki's comments, also from a new ways of working perspective, Māori outcomes is one of the 3 foundational commitments or cross-cutting strategies across the LTP in the 7 investment areas. So it's Māori outcomes as well as Te Tāruki a Tāwhiti, which is the climate action plan, and Ngā Hapori Momoho, which is the thriving communities as well. So all of our general managers and departments are now putting Māori outcomes and climate and thriving equities or an equitable outcomes across all of their work, which is something a bit different that we haven't done previously.
Okay, that sounds good. And so this will help to kind of move past, a lot of the time the questioning is around engagement. Did you engage with Māori? And then at some point it's almost tokenistic. So this will move us past token engagement?
So it's part of, I guess, a wider lot of work. So of course we have this framework which will set the tone and set the strategy for the work that we're doing with our Māori communities. Engagement is also a priority. It's a priority for the CEO, and we are doing a lot more work in that space to build, well, to answer first of all, of course, the He Waka Kotuia audit recommendations that have come through, but also just to increase our engagement with Māori. I think there's a twofold piece there. It's around making sure that we've got good engagement over all of the work that we're doing, but also maybe reducing the sheer volume of engagement and looking at what's a priority for iwi, what's a priority for our Māori communities, and being really clear and focusing on those things. And that's certainly spoken to in the strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm one of these people who, when I read these papers and realise I don't know enough about what's behind them, that I really can't make a valued comment. But I do want to ask one thing. When I see things like words ensure equity of outcomes and we're signing up to that, does that open us up to any legal challenge in the future if we haven't achieved equity? Because I don't think equity of outcomes is possible, and if you get two people, just two, you won't get an equity of outcomes in their future life. They'll be different no matter what they started from. So I'm worried about any legal obligations that if we sign up to this paper today, can I get an answer from you? Does that open us up to sometime in the future, a particular marae or a particular subgroup of Māori anywhere saying, you agreed to a paper on the 12th of June 2025 that there would be equity of outcomes, and that has not happened, and we are now suing the council for failing to do that?
Thanks for the question. The first part of that, if you would like, Councillor, I'd be happy to take you out to see some of the work that we've been doing. So that's an open invitation, in fact, to any of our councillors. If you'd like to come out and see where our investment has been made in Māori outcomes, I'd certainly be welcome you to come out and have a look. Yep. The second part of that, of course, what we're suggesting with that is specifically a principle base to how we will be looking at our response to marae, our investment into maraes. It's not something that we're saying is set in stone. It's simply suggesting that we have some marae where we've where we've invested $1.2 million, and that's been able to look at things like the carvings or, making sure that their wharekai is really operable. And then we have some that we've had to invest into maraes in rural settings where, because they're not connected to the mains and things like that, that we've had to invest into things like water or into the ablutions. So it's not necessarily saying that we are holding to that as a fixed position, but recognising that in our criteria and how we make these assessments, that we're considering those elements as well.
Look, I'm absolutely fine with that as the principle and what you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to take things. I guess I'll ask it really specifically. If we sign up to this paper and approve it today, is there any ability in the future for someone to use the decisions we take today to be the foundation of legal action against the council for having failed to achieve those outcomes?
So, first, I'm not in a position to give legal advice to the planning committee, and that is, if that is something that you seek, then I'll talk to the chair as well as Megan as to how we might be able to achieve that. The second thing is that we have, as part of our review, we have put this to our legal team that have looked at it. And of course, this isn't the criteria, it's really the direction setting element of this. So when we come back with our criteria investment and we're specific about how we will be dealing with that putia, then we will have we can probably give you a more robust answer at that time.
So the rubber will hit the road more when you get to the specifics rather than the general direction of travel at point.
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good question. I guess maybe if I could add to that, I guess, are you, Nikki, more saying, because we've already approved these budgets through LTP and this is more of a review rather than a new policy, is it more around the individual agreements with, if we prove a allotment of, say, 33 applications, it'd be those, if we don't comply with...
That's exactly right.
And settlement-related activity, I imagine. But largely the policy is political, not legal. Would that be accurate? Okay. Councillor Walker.
Well, I've got a couple of questions, Mr. Chair, and essentially they follow on from Councillor Williamson. And I guess the larger context is it correct to say that council policies, strategies and plans inform the organisation at large, including the CCOs? And this would be such a strategy or measurement framework or the like. I'm assuming this is a form of strategy?
It's a strategic, so Yes, just through the chair, it is a strategic document. It's already existing. It's already part of our policy framework. What we have done is refreshed it, made it a little, simplified it, and made it so that it is speaking to the priorities of iwi and our Māori communities.
Yes, I understand that. If I look at point 18, which is prioritising Māori and community needs, does it follow that it prioritise Māori ahead of any other? Because priority, I'm assuming, means first.
So with regards to the funding, this is a Māori outcomes funding framework. It stands alone alongside a number of other community-led investments that this council makes. So in that regard, it does not prioritise one over any other, but it is specific about the delivery of Māori outcomes. I think what the paper is referring to is how we deal inside that vacuum of Māori outcomes, how we deal specifically with iwi and our Māori communities.
So to be clear then, it's not talking about council at large, CCOs, in respect of prioritising Māori. It's only prioritising something within this area that you're describing.
That's how I would describe it, yes.
It might be useful to have some clarification because it's not obvious to me that that is the case. The other question I've got is in situations where marae, for example, played a part for the wider community, and that's been the case in recent storm events and the like, is there any acknowledgement of that role here? Because marae aren't just for Māori, they're for the community at large, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so we acknowledge them quite regularly. I do actually think we've specifically brought that back to a number of committees around some of the work that Māori do for the community. You know, it's an interesting perspective that we have marae at all. These are cultural hubs. These are spiritual spaces, and they do play a role in our community, and they do often help other communities. But let's be clear, our mana whenua marae have often been there for, you know, a long period of time, in some instances before the formation of Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland City. So they do play a role in terms of servicing their people. But ultimately, I think you'll find that most maraes are very welcoming and allow for a broader range of things that support our wider communities.
To be clear, this strategy is for both mana whenua and mata waka marae, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thanks. I would be interested in taking up your offer to go and have a look at what's been delivered, but it just prompted a question. When a marae is, when part of the development is set up under you know, a resilience centre, an evacuation centre, a storm recovery centre, who pays? Is the budget for, you know, I'm thinking of one particular site I know of north of Helensville, where there was all sorts of generators and all sorts of infrastructure put in to make it a community, you know, resilience centre. Does that come out of your budget too, or is there another budget feeds in for that stuff?
Kia ora, Councillor. So just at a sort of high level, and I don't have all of the detail, but through the marae infrastructure program, we're essentially making sure that we're trying to sort of bring the building up to a standard, up to a standard where they can accommodate safely during any event or even just in normal operation. We do have an instance for Aotea Great Barrier where we've funded a generator out of the Māori Outcomes Fund to, you know, in the event of again for normal operation, but also to support that emergency management response. But yeah, in terms of other infrastructure, we haven't, as far as I'm aware, put any specific infrastructure in for emergency management. But we'd need to talk to our emergency management team to sort of be able to clarify, you know, any assets that have gone in there.
As my understanding, Councillor Turner, not that you asked me, but yeah, long-term infrastructure that could be funded through the funds would be for the marae, but for things like emergency, COVID, the storms, things like that, it was sort of resources went where they were needed, whether it was in a library, a leisure centre, a community centre, marae, the building didn't matter, or church. So it was more where the resource was needed, and of course those agencies, including marae, would be using their own resource and donations and things as well. But largely, as far as I remember, it was, we need a generator here, we need toilet paper here, we need towels and sheets here. It wasn't labelled on whether it was marae or community centre or church.
Yep. Thank you. I was talking about significant infrastructure, but when we have a drive around, we have to ask questions then. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Member Hennaday, and then I've got Councillor Bartley, and we might try and close up questions after Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. The question relates to the question before Councillor Turner. Do you have any examples whereby marae, Māori in general, reo Māori programs jumped in front of somebody else or at their expense?
Nothing comes to mind, Member Toe.
So where do you think the question stems from? Because I would ask that sort of question if I had an example of somebody being nudged aside so that Project A could get in front.
That may be a little hard for Nick to answer, but yeah, but I think, yeah, no. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask, one of your outcomes of measurements was storytelling up there. And as a Samoan, that's the basis of society, is whaangongo, that's what we call it, the storytelling. And I'm really interested in how you bring storytelling into a construct that, say, the finance team could understand, so you don't lose the richness of the storytelling and how we measure the outcomes. I think it's fascinating to bring it into the council. So, and is it the first time that it's been done for any council in Aotearoa?
Through the Chair, unfortunately I am unable to respond to the question around whether or not we're the first council to ever engage in storytelling as part of our reporting on impact outcomes for Māori. However, we see the having the Māori voice as one of the ways that we're able to look at the impact for Māori. One of the things that Nick as tūmoaki and Phil as Chief Executive have been doing is we now have a Māori outcome lead for the group finance team. Just to go back to your question with regards to, a challenge of the finance team kind of describing a storytelling.
Yeah. Not a put down on the finance team, but in terms of, the finances.
Yes.
Because everything in this place is about finances.
Yes, and one of the things that that Māori outcome lead has been looking at is it's not. I'm just trying to think of the appropriate words. It's not around teaching Māori to be numerate or literacy. It's around ensuring that they understand and communicate and can talk about financial aspects of the budget, for example. which we had included when we came, when we had the Māori outcomes input into the annual plan, for example, a couple of weeks ago. So there are ways that you can bring in elements of finance or other enabling support like recruitment or people and culture aspects. So we think that with Tamaki Ora, with the Achieving Māori Outcomes plans, each of the departments within Auckland Council will be able to articulate what it is that they can do, are doing, from that is increasing the impact for Māori.
Through the chair, just to add to that a little bit. So last year, if you recall, we did bring to Haukura and the governing body a document outlining the evaluation processes that we've been through. And storytelling, I guess, another way of talking about that is a qualitative way of measuring things. So going out, talking to people, doing interviews, bringing that information, and then getting that information out there. We've also, there's been a number of videos where we've been able to put onto social media some of the great outcomes that our community is doing in the marae space, in the community space as well. I guess what we're trying to do with this measurement framework is not just rely on the numerical data, but actually have some really compelling stories that are really showing the differences that we make, and then bring that information back to you. Because I think if you see the numbers, if we look at the input, we're looking at the output, and then you can see what that actually means for some of the people in our communities, that will give a lot more certainty to this council that the investment is the right investment.
Thank you. Well, thank all the three of you for presenting, but the teams also who work alongside you on this mahi. So we really appreciate it, and really clear answers to what is quite a big part of what we do for the city, for the council. So thank you. And we'll just get you to step back, and I'll move, and I think Councillor Filipina wanted a second. And we're moving in second.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, kapai. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor. We'll move and second both item 8 and item 9. Would anyone like to speak to this? Right, cool. I will not tempt fate, and we'll just go straight to the vote then. I think this is two fantastic pieces of work in a part of what we do, in integrating it better throughout the whole Auckland Council whānau. And I think there's a lot of exciting stuff here, and as Deputy Mayor and others would like to go on the tour to see some of the work. Some of us have seen the great work that's done through these proposals, but I think this helps us understand and appreciate the outcomes more. All those in favour?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Perfect, we'll have that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move to item 10. Deputy Mayor would like to move. We will have officers come to the table. Deputy Chair would like to second, I think. Yeah. Kia ora, Moira and Letitia. Thank you very much. This is very straightforward, but if you just want to go through the details briefly for people to understand. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou and talofa lava.
I'm sorry, Moira, if you just want to pull the microphone a little bit closer to you, the base, yeah, moves close.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I have a couple of slides up there just to show how the properties are being encroached. So the two sites in Omoi Ave, St Heliers, and Point Chevalier Road, Point Chevalier, are both access ways that have been encroached on by the adjoining landowners. These sites are subject to the Reserves Act and are being progressed under the Surface Property Optimisation Framework. The respective local boards support the disposal of the sites, and eligible projects have been identified for the proceeds of sale. Public consultation has been undertaken in accordance with the Reserves Act, and we received 2 inquiries from the adjoining owners of the Point Chevalier site, and both adjoining owners are interested in purchasing the site. We received 7 submissions for Omoy Avenue, 4 objections and 3 in support of the proposed revocation. 2 objections were received on the basis that the submitters would like the site retained as an accessway. In response to that, the council group is of the view that the site is being encroached on and forming an accessway is not feasible due to the contours and landslips. The other 2 objections from adjoining owners were from adjoining owners who sought certainty they would have the opportunity to participate in a fair and agreeable process that would enable them to purchase a share of the site. The submitters are aware of our intention to sell the sites to the adjoining owners, but the first step is to revoke the reserve status of the land. We are therefore seeking approval to submit an application to the Minister of Conservation to revoke the reserve status of each site. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And just to the property optimisation, just to be clear for the committee, that's actually where the local boards are in favour, but they also receive the funding because they've actually put these forward. That's correct? Yeah, thank you. Member Ashby.
Kia ora, thank you. Just a quick one, and thanks for the report. As part of the process, do you investigate the origin of the acquisition of the land in the first place? So, and could you just give me some comfort, I guess, that, because I know that no responses were received and I know it's a small piece of land, so in principle don't have an issue, but just want some comfort that the investigation included looking into how it came into council hands, because there's often an interest of iwi in that part.
Thank you. Through the Chair, we undertake comprehensive due diligence on every property that we look at for any form of potential disposal. That includes, usually the primary thing that we're looking at is to understand how the land's been held and if the council group has any obligations under the Public Works Act to the land. But we also go back to ascertain if it was ever subject to any of the Land Acts or any other pieces of legislation that might still carry relevance today. We also, as part of our consultation process for every piece of property that we're looking at, we engage with mana whenua to understand if there's any issues of cultural significance, because we do understand that while we can look at what the legislative background may have been of a specific property, in respect of Māori land, there's a lot of oral history that's not always picked up by looking at old records. So we do that for every property. We did that for these 2 properties, and no issues were raised either through the due diligence process or in our engagement with mana whenua.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Member Ashby. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. I noticed that the Satalius one is all very happy for the local board and for the landowners. But my question is about point 33 in the report, which is the risk and mitigation. And if you notice that there's a risk that the Minister may not agree, could you just take me through, is there, the process around that? Because you go on to say that you will address any issues, but I'm just wondering, is there a process where we can help? If you need help, or how do I put this in a question?
I think I understand what you're trying to say, Madam Chair.
I want to ask a local representative.
Yes.
Are they able to do that?
Through the Chair, when it gets to the point of going to the Minister of Conservation, so the main part of this is where we work with the Department of Conservation. So we will submit everything we know about the piece of land where we're doing a reserve revocation. We'll submit the rationale that we have for revoking the reserve status. That will be based on the Reserves Act values that may or may not be met with that piece of land. The consultation material and the analysis that we've done working with Council's Land Advisory Services and Parks team, along with this report here and the reports that have gone to the local board and the decisions. There may be questions on that and which they would come back to us on and work through. they would then be the ones who would make the recommendation to the Minister of Conservation. So we would have lots of opportunities if there are questions in addressing those. And we do work with a LINZ accredited agent or a Land Information New Zealand accredited agent in making applications to the Department of Conservation as well.
And my second question, Chair, please, is how long do you think this process will take, noting that this has been approved by current local boards and the clock is ticking?
Through the Chair, thank you for the question. At the moment, we are having or facing an extremely long wait with the Department of Conservation to progress reserve revocations. I think the average amount of time we're waiting at the moment is 18 months. Yes. And so if, to your previous comment, we would welcome any support that anyone in this room would like to provide to central government in that area.
Right, I've got that. And my third question will be to the Mayor. Your Worship, when are you next meeting the Minister of Conservation? Because could you ask them to give a bit of a hurry up to our work, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. If may, I've got a resolution on the next item about the writing to the Minister of Conservation, and the Mayor, is also writing to the Minister about the Marine Protection Act, and maybe we could add another letter as well.
These guys coming? Is he coming on the 19th?
I think he is coming on next Tuesday, so that will be helpful. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, team. Point Chev. Can't let this one go. I know I've heard of sports grounds, playgrounds, recreation grounds, but this one is brand new to me, and paragraph 11 refers to the acquisition for a pleasure ground. Now, I know this is pre-boomers making decisions. This is a silent generation, and they were quietly going about things that we did not know about. But before we sell a pleasure ground, I really want to know what they were up to and what we've been missing out on.
Is there any offer of a field trip on that?
Not together, please.
Serious question. I want a detailed answer.
Through the Chair, I think it was the enjoyment of nature.
Not naturist.
The silent generation were not that straightforward, you know. Post-depression, post-war.
Thank you. I'm now lost my place, but there's no other no other questions. Councillor Walker.
Well, I do appreciate that there are some issues with the site, but having said that, is it not conceivable that that with some engineering you can have something that's above ground, steps and the like, so that you can resolve some of the issues? Because I am mindful that, I mean, once we've lost something like this, we're not going to get it back in terms of connectivity in that area.
Through the Chair, yes, it is conceivable that with engineering an accessway could be formed. That doesn't mean it's necessarily feasible to do so. I would also note that this strip of land has been encroached on by private landowners since 1928, so there hasn't actually been public benefit.
I mean, my experience in a number of instances is you've got a chicken and egg situation where sometimes landowners deliberately encroach onto an area. They ensure that people can't use it, and later things become rather self-defeating and we end up like this. And there isn't any investment in enhancing it or improving the walkway. So I'm just putting that on the record, and the reason for that, Mr. Chair, is I'm certainly familiar with many walkways, paper roads and the like, in locations that might not have a need now, but in the future, particularly with climate change and locations by the coast, and they may have a call later on. So I just want to put that on the record. I wouldn't want to see this as any form of precedent.
Thank you. And through the Chair, can I just note that this is the view from the public of the street entrance to this piece of reserve land. So unless you're one of the adjoining owners, I don't think you would actually know it's there, and that's how it's really not meeting its reserve reserves at values because it's not delivering benefit to the public.
So how do they even get away with closing it off like that?
Through the chair, that's probably a question for regulatory services.
And the reason I'm mentioning this is I could take you to a number of locations where people have done this, sometimes in instances where there isn't an impediment for people to use a given area other than it may have been planted out. So I just want to put that on the record. This is a serious concern across parts of Auckland. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Were you speaking about both instances? Were you speaking about both parcels of land? Yeah. Is that your concern?
In general, yes.
Yeah, because if you maybe if you just want to go through, just for everyone, if you haven't looked at the presentation, going to go through all the pictures. But my understanding, because I did ask these questions as well, Councillor Walker, but they all sort of go from nowhere to nowhere. But the Point Chev one, my understanding is there is another access like 2 properties away. So
Through the chair, and sorry, we should have included an image that you can see it just here. There's the entrance to the wider park just further along. So this one was never formed as a formal access way, and from the street level, the area hatched in orange is what it looks like. So there's a garage that's been constructed at the rear of it, so you wouldn't actually know, again, it was a reserve.
yeah, so that I was just making clear that there is access about 2 properties away, so it would be unlikely community facilities or anyone would pay to build another walkway 2 properties away. Okay, cool. Are there any other questions? Councillor Lee.
Thank you. In terms of the Omoi St Heliers Reserve, under what's its classification under the Reserves Act? Local purposes or?
Through the chair, we'll just double check our records.
Okay. 7 people submitted on it. 3 people were for the sale and 4 people or 4 submitters were against. What were the reasons in the submissions for the council selling the reserve?
They wanted to acquire, through the chair, they wanted to acquire the land, and they recognised that it was being utilised for private benefit rather than public benefit.
Given we're meant to represent the public, it would be good to hear a summary anyway of the views. The other one is, why were the 4 people, the majority, opposed to this? A summary, if you like. If they're all different, if they're all the same, in other words, they may be different.
Through the chair, all of the submissions are actually contained in this report. If you scroll a bit further down, they're in the attachments. So the reasons are set out in there. The people who were opposed to felt that it should be formed as an access way, which isn't financially feasible. It would be a great deal of money due to the contours of the land and the fact that there's been landslips through this strip of land. The other 2 who were opposed also want to purchase the land, and they wanted certainty that there would be a fair market process that they could participate in. So essentially they wanted reassurance that we weren't going to sell the land on the open market and that then they would have to remove their various encroachments and they'd lose the benefit of that land. So they wanted the ability to purchase it.
Thank you.
And sorry, through the chair. Yes, public reserve, and my apologies, that is actually in paragraph 8. Yeah, so the reason for vesting was public reserve.
That's all. There's no other questions? Sure. I think she just has a comment. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you both. I think it's fairly clear. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lee, did you have another question? Okay, Right, we have a mover and a seconder already. We have Councillor Ferry who'd like to speak to it.
Kia ora. Just to quickly note, it's good that we're working through tidying up these little parcels of land. And in particular, this is something that I know from earlier terms, local boards were keen that the proceeds be returned to local boards. And so I'm really glad to see that that's happening with this process, that there's a recognition that, you know, these are local bits of land, and the opportunity is there to spend the proceeds on local improvements. So really glad that that's happening. I guess the frustration with the delays at the Minister of Conservation end is something that we're just going to have to deal with over time, but it would be good to see that streamlined in some way, and I wonder if that's something that actually, you know, again, is this something where we should have some powers of our own, given, you know, some of the, you know, these are messy little bits of land that go back decades, and there might be some value in seeing if actually we can get some powers to just resolve these kinds of things ourselves without that sign-off. But yeah, mainly just wanted to point out, great to see that the tidy-up's happening, long may it continue, and good that the money is going to local boards. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else like to speak? No? Right. All those in favour? Any opposed? Cool, thank you. Move on to the next one. 11. We have Dave, Sam and Imogen. Kia ora. I'll just move this, and I think the Mayor was keen to second. And I've added, and sorry I didn't get a chance to send it around, but I think most people will be okay with it. Just added a D, which is endorsed the Mayor and Chair of the Policy and Planning Committee, writing to the Minister for Conservation requesting central government funding contributions are secured for the Auckland Regional Pest Management Programs Taira Tū Mai Tonga, Kawe Predator Eradication, Te Kurawai o Waiheke, and Poipoia Te Kākano, which is the kaipara work to ensure project outcomes are achieved over the applicable timeframes for each project. And I can go into that more. We've put that is in the submission, but I just wanted to accentuate that because we have concerns that now Predator 2050s and Jobs for Nature are being wound up, that actually all those groups will be coming to us for that funding because these programs need to continue. Otherwise, the investment prior to that is a waste because the pests come back pretty quick when you stop doing the work. And we've had amazing outcomes already through those. So I could talk about it a bit more later, but I'm hoping people are fine with the D there. Obviously debate if they are not. So, right, who are we going to first?
Greetings everyone. Thanks for the opportunity again to provide a report to you which encompasses proposed Auckland Council views on the refresh of this Predator-Free 2050 strategy. This is the second, or this refresh follows the first strategy that was produced about 5 years ago, so it just has a 5-year window of review, and we're looking to provide this advice through to the delegated authorisers following resolution today for comment. So if I just firstly introduce the team on the front desk here today. I've got Sam Anwar, and he's a Principal Analyst, Natural Environment Strategy with me. He's in our team. And I've also got Dr. Imogen Bassett, who's from Environmental Services, and of course Dave Allen, Manager, Natural Environment Strategy within Policy. So, as the Chair just noted, the recommendations today have been extended to include a D. The key point here is that we're looking to provide the Council's response to this particular central government review and get that delegated to decision makers before we have to submit this by the 30th of June. I'll hand over to Sam.
Good morning, members. Just before I go into the details of the consultation, I thought it would be useful just to provide an overview and the timelines. As Dave mentioned earlier, the purpose of this report is to provide a submission to the Department of Conservation on their consultation of predator-free strategy, 2050 strategy towards a predator-free New Zealand. This is an update to an existing strategy that was published in 2020. The consultation opened on the 5th of May, and the closing is on the 30th of June. We anticipate, the department anticipates that the consultation paper, the proposals will be approved by the end of the year. One of the things that happened during the consultation period was the Budget 2025 happened, where a predator-free 2050 Limited was disestablished through that process, and there's no mention of that disestablishment through this paper itself. I'll just talk very briefly about Predator-Free 2050 consultation paper. It continues the existing approach and has 4 focus areas, which is mobilise for action to inspire New Zealanders and empower communities to take action. It also, the next focus area is to maintain the gains, which is to continue essential predator control in the region. The third focus area is about innovation for eradication, which is to use advanced tools tools and techniques to effectively eradicate some of the pests in there. And the fourth focus area is to prepare for accelerate, is to develop a clear evidence-based plan to achieve the 2050 goals. Our draft submission is overall supportive of the proposals within the discussion as it continues some of the existing approach. And our submission provides some detailed feedback on those 4 focus areas. There are a number of key areas that we do have concerns around, and one of those is that it seems that the proposal seems to be in isolation and don't take into account some of the broader issues that are happening. For example, our reform of the resource management system. We did undertake a high-level assessment of the proposals of the document, and in most instances it seems to be aligned with what we're seeking to achieve. There are some of the goals are quite ambitious, in particular around community participation as being one of those. It's seeking to increase participation by 25% based on a 2025 baseline. So that's quite an ambition for us, as we're actually achieving that already. So increasing that will be quite hard for the council. The discussion paper also highlights at the end of the paper about increasing the target species from the 7 mammalian current species to include 10. It proposes that this expansion doesn't happen because there's quite a lot of issues already around there. But there is a kind of long-standing issue around feral cats, and they kind of suggest that we kind of don't do that at this point in time. But we do think that the central government does have some roles in this. I'd like to talk very quickly about the disestablishment of Predator-Free 2050 Limited. I won't read the slide. These are presented in the report itself. Some of the key issues around the risks that remain are there, and those are presented in the report as well. We also provided a bit of a high-level summary about the financial implications around the disestablishment of Predator-Free 2050 Limited. These are presented in the table. As we can kind of see in general, that the funding from the level of funding for each programme is varied, and the proportion of council funding varies depending on the individual project. And the predator-free funding that's not from council comes from a variety of sources, including Jobs for Nature and Department of Conservation and Foundation North, for example, as some of those ones. And there are some issues around the ongoing funding beyond 2027.
Just to sum up, the strategy itself is not presenting significant issues for this council. It's a national set of goals. Generally, we are consistent with it. There are a couple of observations this council can make in its submission that just highlight a few things. There's a couple of things I wanted to just highlight in the case of the Hauraki golf areas. I did receive some advice yesterday from Izzy, so we can build in a paragraph that sort of boosts the commentary around island, pest-free island status of the golf. So just to acknowledge that for Councillor Lee. And then I guess the other one I wanted to note was the Kaipara work. We're just going to make a particular mention of that as well. So there's a number of activities that we're doing across the council that we want to just highlight, and also for our Hukura members, just an observation about the first goal talks about mobilisation, and it has goals about for Maori, and I think what we will need to do in our submission is possibly to put in a sentence there about treaty settlements, just sort of very mindful of our Waitakere Ranges area and how that's managed and what might be the expectations, the aspirations for the interests in that area. So just an observation there. And we just don't do it explicitly enough in our draft at the moment. So I think there's a couple of tweaks that I expect we'll work through with the delegated authorisers just to cover those issues off. And the observations about the disestablishment of predator-free are sort of really for information purposes for this discussion. And as the Chair's noted, it's an additional matter that can be usefully canvassed through a correspondence with the Minister of Conservation. And I'll leave that perhaps to Richard to round off, but that's our presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to be clear, this is not the submission isn't actually on the disestablishment. We can obviously note our concerns, but that was decided on the day, and I have confirmed through staff that we were not notified. It was in the budget documents. Sadly, not even the CEO was notified until it was in the budget documents. So that's pretty tough. So that has been disestablished. The rest of the review, although connected, so we're trying to give both points our dissatisfaction over the disestablishment, but also saying, well, this is actually a good plan, but whether we note that there can be a contradiction. Just on a question, and maybe it's for Imogen or anyone, but could you just explain to the committee who may not know, the tūmaitonga we have presented at this committee before, but I guess all of them, what are the outcomes beyond just, pest eradication, biodiversity is amazing, but what has been actually the investment impacts for the island, for that community? It's broader than just pest eradication, which is, of course, very important. But
Kia ora, yeah, I think absolutely. This is a prime example of where we see social outcomes really intertwined with biodiversity outcomes. So a huge amount of employment raising, so a real ability for mana whenua there to be able to bring people home, to actually be able to work on island. I think the long-term trajectory is for that to really increase. The tourism, biodiversity, infrastructure opportunities associated with that are huge as well, and a real enabling of fulfilling of treaty obligations and Ngāti Rūhua, Ngāti Wai, Kia Aotea being able to actually have the capacity to really give effect to that relationship with the whenua there.
And because the budget potential uncertainty, are we able, do you believe that with our tight budgets we're going to be able to continue those programs? I mean, Councillor Lee and I were on Waiheke a few weeks ago because we've amazingly introduced Kiwi onto the island, but this could only have been possible with this partnership between Council, mana whenua, DOC, the Community Predator 2050, is that, what happens going forward?
I think, as you mentioned earlier, pests do revert very rapidly if you take your foot off the pedal. Council has never committed to funding the totality of any of these projects, so their continuation is heavily reliant on external funding sources. We are, for example, in the Kawo project, we're working really effectively with the New Zealand Nature Fund to be able to bring in non-rates, non-Crown revenue to support that, but I think the reality is that that's never going to be able to fulfil all of that. So I think there is a significant risk to some of these projects if we don't have continuation of significant contributions from other parties, particularly Crown.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Chair, and to a degree, Imogen has probably responded in part, but may I say that I welcome the D that you have, and I've just had some concern that we haven't had in the presentation sufficient response on the loss of sponsorship and partnership funding, which is what Predator 2050 was all about. What further ramifications might occur, could the officers speak to, with the change, which seems very short-sighted from my perspective, for cutting some administrative costs, we are going to potentially forego a lot of philanthropic and sponsorship and partnership funding into the future. What might that be if we're looking at the LTP for next year? What would the challenge be?
Through the chair, I think absolutely the challenge with these kind of eradication type projects is that they do require a continuity of funding. You can't sort of stop and start it, otherwise there is a really significant challenge there. I think we did always know that some of the major Crown contributions were time bounded, and so that uncertainty has always been there. It is absolutely true that there is increased uncertainty there, and I think it's very difficult to really answer Councillor Fletcher's question with certainty, but it is something we're going to have to think about really carefully in terms of what Council can provide and how we can partner with other organisations effectively. I think it's the administrative elements of predator-free. There may or may not be an argument for shifting them into the Department of Conservation, but it's certainly unclear from what we're hearing from government at the moment whether the department will actually be in any position to be able to resource this, and we know that they're already incredibly stretched across the remainder of their work, so I think it's certainly concerning.
Can you pardon me, can you confirm that with that being transferred to the Department of Conservation, they are not equipped to be able to pursue some of those sponsorships as would a private entity or a Crown entity like Predator Free New Zealand? Can you just highlight where any obstacle might be in pursuing sponsorships going forward?
Through the chair, I mean, I don't feel that it's I'm in a position to really sort of comment on what funding processes the department might have within their system, but what I do think is it's very clear that they have some significant capacity challenges that would need to be worked through, and I think we're really waiting for some further clarification from central government about what the implications are.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the D that you have prepared, and I hope that we can expand on that in some way that really gives a better understanding of what the consequences of this decision might be.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, and sorry to hear you're so unwell, but thank you for being here and for your comments on this over the last couple of weeks. We will make sure in the letter that we question the capability of DOC and ability, even as you say, for a Crown agency to do the type of, philanthropic or business or whatever it is type fundraising that Predator 2050 set up by the John Key government was kind of, one of the purposes was to be able to get that additional boost of funding from others through that mechanism as opposed to through a Crown agency, which can be, as you say, much more difficult. So we'll ensure that's part of the letter, and we'll send it to you as well if you'd like to look at it.
Thank you, Chair. I won't speak to the item, but I just think we've lost that power of leverage, and it's very, very short-sighted.
Absolutely. Kia ora. Councillor Walker.
I've got a few questions. So, Predator-Free 2050s Limited, it's a charitable Crown-owned company. So, in this instance, the Crown is the shareholder, and I'm assuming also director. Is it conceivable that Auckland Council, together with other councils, could take on this company? I mean, that's just a matter of changing the shareholding and the directors and the like. Has that been considered?
So it hasn't been considered, and it's going through a disestablishment process. I think I just want to revert back to sort of the previous discussion we just had, which was about us approaching the Minister to really work out what might be the next steps in terms of how DOC administers things and what systems they might need to improve to still achieve the outcomes that we're seeking. Because at one level it's a change of the landlord, should we call it, looking after the task, and it's really about sort of how we then still achieve some of the outcomes that are expected of that program that was in place. So I think it's probably the best bang for buck, Councillor Walker, there, is to sort of work with the Minister of Conservation to ascertain how we can see these programs advanced.
Okay, that doesn't really answer my question. So my question is about taking over the ownership of the company. I'm assuming the need still exists, that is to eliminate pests. I'm assuming that the area, which is New Zealand, which involves both the Crown and private property owners, iwi and the like, I'm assuming that all of those stakeholders still exist. So, given that you've got something set up, and given that councils may be a valid entity to take it on, why can't we consider that? There might be a number of councils that were interested in picking up on this, and other entities that could be shareholders.
Through the chair, I mean, yeah, it's not something that we've considered in the short time since this announcement. I think it's an interesting idea which I can certainly feed back to Te Kahika, the Regional Council Collective, but there would obviously be a number of financial implications of it that would need to be worked through pretty carefully. And I think as Dave mentioned, in the first instance, we're just seeking further clarification from central government about what their intentions are at this point.
Well, I'm just putting to you that it's worth exploring. I don't know what capital there is in the company.
It's a saving of 3.6 million. So
I know.
Yeah.
I understand there's a saving of 3.6 million. I mean, a company will have capital. It would be useful to know what the amount of capital is and whether the government might be interested in leaving some money in. I don't know. It seems pretty crazy to take something that I think Rob Fennick and others were involved in floating, a lot of good people, to trash it.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Walker, we could probably take this probably.
There's a whole ecosystem around this.
I don't think we disagree with you at all, but the officers here probably couldn't comment. We would probably engage the Mayor with the conversation, but because the decision's already been made, voted on through Budget 2025, governments don't have to consult on their budgets like ours, so it's already done. The decision's been made, and they've made that saving in their budget, 3.6 million, by disestablishing an agency. But I think you bring up a good point. What are the options to us ongoing? But for the officers here, it's not something. But in our letter and our conversation with the Minister, hopefully next week, maybe we could.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, none of that presupposes that there can't be a change in the shareholding. That's a pretty simple transaction. It's just a matter of councils like ours getting our act together.
Yeah, Councillor Lee.
And thank you. Can I just apologise? I misspoke during the previous item about submissions. They were in the attachment, but they're not in my hard copy, so please apologise to those ladies if you could. Thank you. In regard to the item here, we're talking about a submission. We should note that the Predator-Free Trust was established in 2013, and then the Prime Minister at the time, John Key, announced and established the Predator-Free New Zealand 2050 Limited, a company to achieve the visionary goal. So 10 years almost, and there's a significant amount of money being invested. But in terms of this council's role and this submission, I wonder if the council could use this opportunity to take a more of an audit approach on progress rather than being kind of tangled up, if you like, in the Hauraki Gulf. And I've had a message from the chair of the Aotea Great Barrier Local Board who wants more emphasis placed on the Hauraki Gulf, and I fully agree. And it's not just these groups that have been set up who do good work, provide employment and so on. It's the objective, isn't it? Eradication. Now, 10 years have gone by, and I don't think anywhere in any location there's been actual complete eradications. 10 years have gone by, and how much money. And therefore, I think the council needs to have a more of an audit oversight role. Here's the money, but that's one department. We are the hard-nosed auditors, and we're going to check on progress because we believe in this 2050 timeline, and 10 years has gone past, and there's a lot of emphasis on control. Control is not eradication. Control is actually culling, and it may actually help the survivors. And in that respect, the Pest-Free Carwell project is targeting wallabies and ship rats, Noi rats, mustelids. They're off the hook. Anyway, that's a different matter. My question is, in terms of this submission, do you think there is an opportunity for the council to take an oversight view, taking it very seriously, actually emphasising the Hauraki Gulf, because that's the best place to achieve eradications, islands, and take that approach? What's the officer's feeling on that?
Well, firstly, Auckland Council, through its departments, are involved with those projects and will have, the on-the-ground involvement as to how well it's going. In terms of a strategy document, maybe there's some points that could be made about how we can see some monitoring and performance measures introduced into the strategy so that you can actually make an assessment as to are we just controlling or are we eradicating. The other point is that we can certainly emphasise the desire to see achieving eradication goals more clearly expressed, so we can do that as well. So I think there's a number of ways we could tweak the submission that speak to the points you've raised, Councillor Lee. So I think that is possible. I think I'd also want to explore with the Department of Conservation, how are you measuring your performance currently yourselves? Because, like you're saying, there could be other parties who are putting in dollars that could, say, well, that's not necessarily the best contribution we've made, or we could do it better. So I think the points you raise are ones that we can sort of explore in the submission further.
And can I just add to that to say also, it is one of the things that's really pleasing to see in the consultation document is an emphasis on outcome monitoring. So that is to say, are we seeing biodiversity recovery as a result of all this pest control? And fundamentally, whether it's eradication or control, that's the thing that should be front and centre of our minds, is what are we trying to achieve. So, we support that as a thing to have more focus on from the government. And also we've been able to note our role in threatened species monitoring as well, as part of essentially that audit function, to be able to see what kind of trajectory are those outcome factors going in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. With those figures there, just on a rule of thumb percentage, how much gifting philanthropy does it attract? You know, of the values we're spending, are we getting 5% or 50%? Are we attracting of you know, money being delivered by philanthropy? Because you said that was to try to make sure we had the ability to attract philanthropic money into the whole scheme, correct? That's what it says there on that little, for those little stars there.
Yeah.
Kia ora, through the chair. In the column where it says secured to 2027 non-council, so that left-hand side, we have a reasonably decent breakdown for two of the projects, that's Tūmatonga and the Kawe project. And so specifically in Tūmatonga, there's around $2.6 million that's come through Foundation North, so that's that philanthropic avenue. And for Kawe, we've been able to work with the New Zealand Nature Fund and set up a platform by which members of the community can donate to the project, and that has brought in just over 800,000 for that project as well. So that's, what is that, just under a third of the total.
Okay, so in my sort of naivety, I sort of, so that I thought philanthropic was where someone with a pocket full of spare money gave us money, not where we went and made an application to Foundation North. Is that how that money comes?
So that's around, so we're not the project lead for Tūmatonga, so, but as a project led by Mana Whenua, their application is to Foundation North, and we're a co-funding partner to that.
Okay, I would support Councillor Lee's position about let's try to make sure we use this to ignite a bit of an audit on everything, because I, for one, find it really hard to put together all the laminations of process, the layers of process that develop over a decade or so, you know. And when I was listening to your talk, I was thinking about, you know, the natural environment and targeted rate, the NETA rate. You know, we gave money towards the National Pest Management Strategy development. We had staff involved in all that sort of stuff. This is all sort of connected together. And then I was thinking about the fact that our ownership, we say we want to be spare of, you know, free of national government, decrees, and yet we seem to be really concerned about this thing coming to a halt. When we collect $32 million a year from the NETA, we've collected 199 since it was started. We've only spent 167. We've only spent 32 million on tracks. There's some big gaps left there, and so my question is: A, yes, I agree. Can we audit what we're doing, and can we not? Where can we take ownership of this ourselves, where we have more direction rather than worried about the government pulling out?
Can I just make some general observation? There is quite a lot of community support for some of these projects, and they do put in money. So just to be clear, it's not just through Foundation North or QE2 or other sorts of bodies. In the case of Kawau, for example, there's a lot of community money that's coming in. So, you know, there is partnerships that are forged across these different areas to help with getting the outcomes that are desired. There's more detail with these projects, of course, on websites and everything else that will break that down. And there's a lot of operational staff involvement with the running of these projects as well. So there's an in for making sure that things are going okay. So I just wanted to express those 2 points, because at the moment we're sort of just presenting this in a bit of a hurry over the last 2 weeks because of the decision made to just establish predator-free. The other comment was that funding for this was only secured through till the end of financial year 27 from predator-free. So there will need to be some decisions about how any shortfall is made up, whether it's Auckland Council or other bodies. And so I guess the key thing is that that's why it's important to have that resolution D to say we need to go to the Minister of Conservation and start to test some of these questions, very valid questions about how we should be involved more explicitly, perhaps.
Less vulnerable to these sorts of movements because the pests don't worry about us, not having funding.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, and correct me if I'm wrong, these projects here, Councillor Turner, they're not on council land, and we actually haven't been the lead on these. We've been partnering, whereas NETA projects are usually and normally within council reserves or led by council. These ones are mostly on dock and private land, and we've been a great partner, but our concern is when the tide goes out, we become picking up the government responsibility. So it's a little bit different to wanting government to help us with our responsibilities. We obviously see the environment as all our responsibility, but I guess in this case we're highlighting the ones, and maybe if I'm on the wrong track, but these.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out too, so the Auckland Council contribution there is largely natural environment targeted rate funding, so that targeted rate does contribute to these projects, but I think, as the Chair just noted, they are projects which are in inhabited communities and really led by community enthusiasm, and so they're not something that Council seeks to do to the community, but rather to be supporting that community-led action, and we do provide that real technical advice as well as funding. But I think, there would be a choice to us to become the primary sole funder, but we would have to provide a whole lot more money than we currently have in order to have that increased sort of role in steering it. And really, the success of these projects is heavily dependent on the social licence that comes from the community really wanting this, leading this, delivering it in a way which is acceptable to them within their spaces that they are living and working.
Thank you. So then I suppose I support Councillor Walker because you've explained quite a lot of IP in that organisation which is going to be shut down, and if we could simply advocate to take it over or to share a different way of keeping it alive, we don't lose all the stuff you've just talked about. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first observation is that some of those staff are transferring across to dock, so some of that expertise is not entirely lost. And again, this is a transitional issue that would be quite useful to engage the Minister and dock staff about how they might run things in the future. So I think there's things that we can't answer here because we're in that very, interim spot at the moment, but I think there's a lot of discussion we will be wanting to have so that we can inform yourselves as to what level of stake you want to take in some of these projects into the future. So that would be probably a nice way to round off that discussion, recognising this is about us saying, do we believe the central government strategy review is on the right track, which is kind of the main point of getting this resolution today.
And I think if we were consulted before a decision was made, we could have had some of these more integral conversations before, but we know we weren't. Councillor Darby.
Thanks. I can understand our focus on projects. In terms of predator-free 2050 Limited, the company, and its disestablishment, what is your understanding of why it was disestablished other than financial? Did it fail to meet deliverables, key performance indicators, or anything like that?
Well, my understanding is that it's an entirely financial decision.
Sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Oh,
just want to pull your mic closer to
sorry, through the chair. My understanding is that it's an entirely financial decision. Yeah.
So it's entirely financial. They were delivering. My understanding is they were delivering as expected. And I think in terms of projects, they have, it's something like coming up to 1 million hectares of Aotearoa they've been operating in. Is that particularly in the mainland, South Island?
Yeah, I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, but yes, there has been an enormous scaling up of activity. And I think, to your point about mentioning the focus on projects, it's also worth mentioning that across the country, this has really catalysed an energy within communities for conservation activity, which is not entirely constrained to these specifically funded projects. And so we're really seeing significant biodiversity gains and increases in the collective activity into the system through this movement.
In the short time they've undertaken, and this is the big game-changing research that Predator-Free 2050 as a company it's a little bit under the radar. The projects are very visible. You know, it's people in the field and communities and collaboration and philanthropy all coming together. But I have an awareness of the research programs, and there's more than maybe 15, I think, since 20 since they came into being. I'm really concerned about what's going to happen in that space. Can you elaborate? Do you have any understanding of what's going to happen in that space? And now, I know of a few of them in sort of DNA research and that sort of thing on possums. They are the big game changers. The future is not going to be labour in the field as it is now. So I'm really quite concerned about who's going to pick that up. And I can see that the minister's saying that they're funded for now, but there's no commitment going forward. I'd like to know what your understanding is of this game-changing research.
Through the chair, I think you're absolutely right. That research function is really game-changing. So we know that, for example, the components of the aspiration that really focus on large-scale eradications within populated areas, those things are basically not technically feasible with our current tools. You know, in most urban situations, it's very, very tricky. So to really scale up to that national aspiration, we are absolutely needing some kind of additional breakthrough. There has been significant progress on a number of tools under that predator-free auspices over the last few years. I think it's very early days, and really my understanding is much like yours at the moment, that like the project work, the government has said that they will honour that work that's already contracted. But again, we will be seeking further clarity about what the long-term plan is for the Crown to be supporting technological advances, and noting Crown Research Institutes are being restructured as well, and what the wider sort of implications are for the research community.
Okay, Chair, I'm just wondering whether, and last question for the staff, and I'll make some comment on this later too, but do we have our sort of Aotearoa hat on here in making our submission? Because this is like a national program, and it's the collaboration right across the motu on this that is the big thing and the big drive. It's philanthropy, as I mentioned, community collaboration, a lot of amazing inputs. And I would like us to submit extremely strongly on the success of Predator-Free 2050 Limited, the company, and imprint on the government's mind that they are disestablishing, extinguishing, expunging an extremely successful body. Now, my question to you is, in our submission, do we actually put the big nation hat on in making our submission to really stress this is a mistake? This is an accountant's error in funding. And I believe it's just
So we can certainly strengthen it, and yes, we have had the sort of Aotearoa New Zealand hat on in terms of responding to a national document, but I think that is something we can certainly emphasise in the value that the company has brought to research, technology, innovation, not just the projects, and it's also encompassed in the goals that they've actually set out, and so it's a good lever for us to say, yes, we really support the goal, because that means you're going to have to continue to commit to resourcing those kinds of functions, whether it's research, innovation, or whatever else. So we can certainly just amp that up a bit, just in terms of that particular point. There's already about 3 or 4 others that I've sort of mentioned before that I'm looking to probably see that we enhance in the submission.
With your willingness, Chair, and the Deputy Chair, I think it's beholden on to us to really push this much harder.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor. Definitely, and that's why this was originally going to be a staff-led submission, but we asked for it to come here so we could have this conversation and debate. So we'll definitely ensure that before it goes out of our building, that it's fully strengthened in the way you say. So thank you, Member Henare.
Kia ora. Is the feral cat part of the 2050 strategy? Is there anything in there that attacks that problem?
Yeah, sorry, I have a hearing impairment, so sometimes I need help to interpret the question. Through the chair, so the strategy does consult on what the target species for predator-free should be. So the government has previously had some conversation about whether cats should be brought into that or not. In the consultation document that we're submitting on, they've proposed that cats should be excluded from the predator-free target list as they currently are, so no change. What we've said in the draft submission is that we acknowledge that there may be that there are some valid rationales for why you would do that, in the sense that we know that when we call cats pests or targets, that sort of language, albeit when we're talking about feral animals, that it is can be quite damaging to social licence around them being able to manage them effectively. So acknowledging that that exists, but we have also in the submission suggested that that doesn't detract from the fact that the Crown has a significant role to play in cat management, both in terms of effective funding on Crown land, for example, with respect to Tūmaitaonga, where a large proportion of the land is Department of Conservation land, and so we suggested that they should be at the table, effectively resourcing management of feral cats as they would with other pressures on significant ecosystem land. And we've also suggested that there is a role for the government to play in terms of providing a cohesive, effective regulatory platform for cat management in general across the country.
And with respect to who pays for all of this? Is it? I heard Councillor Turner sort of, I think, tried to go down this road about costs. Wouldn't it be better if the Department of Conservation paid rates on their land? Then you could actually afford to put aside some quite some substantial money to pay for a lot of this stuff. You reckon?
Probably not my place to comment on it.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Henare. That is the end of the questions. We'll go to debate now. So thank all of you for this work and trying to balance the actual submission, which is on the refresh, which is quite good, and also highlight our concerns around the disestablishment, which wasn't part of the review. A very strange course of events, but thank you for trying to bring us back to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I moved and the Mayor seconded. I think Councillor Darby would like to speak to this, did you? Yeah. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, I'm going to be making my annual pilgrimage to Field Days tomorrow, and one of the stands I always go to is the Predator-Free 2050 Limited stand, just to see what the new research is, and usually spend about an hour there having a chat. Yes, it's a passion of mine, a personal one, and I was involved in my own 1080 program late last year, and I'm starting to see the success of that. But I read about the success right across the motu in the work that Predator-Free 2050 is delivering. And it is incredible. It's stunning. It's on an oily rag, but it's in partnership with communities right across the islands. And across communities, across business, the philanthropy coming in from silent donors is just, it's stunning to watch and witness. And it's all about being smart and leveraging in a way that's not been done before, and not relying entirely on government money or regional councils, city councils or unitary councils like our own. But it's successful and all the measures are being met, and there's a long way to go to get to that 2050 target. And it's an incredible challenge, but there's a vision there to take on that challenge. And my concern is that for financial reasons only, the government has walked away from this. A successful entity that has galvanised communities right across the nation. And there are great people in the Department of Conservation, but they do not have the culture at the moment. They are demoralised largely because their budgets are under massive pressure as well. Predator-free 2050 rose above all that and kept the momentum through some tough times, and they would have if government had have stuck with it. The research projects are second to none, and they are world-leading projects, and I think we're going backwards really fast with the disestablishment of this entity. Chair, you and I know some of the people, Ed Chignall, Abby Reynolds, that have led that organisation. We know they both, as chief executives of Predator-Free 2050, went well beyond the call of the hours that a chief executive puts in. They run on a skinny staff, I think it might be 15 or 20. What they do is they galvanise thousands of New Zealanders to join in on the crusade to be predator-free in 2050. Thousands of them across towns and villages and coastal communities and big cities. And I think this is an absolute travesty, and we should be submitting strongly and submitting to the Minister when he sees us next week, next Thursday at this time, that this is not the direction this Auckland wants to take. We want to back the successful entities like Predator-Free 2050, the company, and the vision. And so my strong submission is that we all come together and we empower our staff to make an even more powerful submission in favour of Predator-Free 2050 Limited. And if it's not listened to by the government, well, they've disestablished it without reviewing the strategy. It's about face. Let's do our job to get it back up again in some new guise. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? Oh, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just expand on my earlier comments during the question time. I think we have to be mindful of the law of unintended consequences. And that happens at an operational level, and it also seems to be happening at a strategic level. The Auckland region is a maritime region, and when it comes to conservation, natural heritage, islands are very important. And I guess, like the Marlborough Sounds, in terms of wildlife, the Hauraki Gulf is parts of it at least, or some of the islands are of world importance, notably Hauturu, Little Barrier Island. Anyway, what I'm concerned about here is in responding to the government's change, we need to take a considered, constructive approach. Obviously, we're not going to change the government's mind, and in terms of the predator-free vision, I think everyone absolutely supports it. But so unintended consequences, a lot of projects are focusing on certain species, on Waiheke, they focus on mustelids. Other people focus on cats. Not seemingly aware that the main prey of cats, feral cats, mustelids, is actually probably the most deadly or ubiquitous predator of the lot, rats. And so I think we need to be mindful of that. If you take out one species from a suite of predators, you could actually do more harm rather than taking an integrated approach. And you see this also at a strategic level. Prior to predator-free 2050, a whole series of islands were made predator-free in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. I can think just in this century alone, Rakino was cleared of Noi rats by the ARC, Hauturu cleared of Kiori by DOC, Rangitoto, Motutapu, in 2009, I think DOC removed 8 species, predators and pests, and so on. Rakatu more recently, but that was a project that was established prior to predator-free 2050. I can't think of one total eradication after 2050, predator-free 2050 was established, and that could be that establishing corporate-type groups to manage this project without any oversight or audit could actually slow things down, because if you're getting paid and it's a source of employment, there could be a tendency to keep the job going as long as possible. And I think, I'm not sure that has happened, but the facts are there. Progress seems to have slowed down a bit. There are a lot of people participating, coming away feeling good, but culling is not killing, and control is not eradication. And therefore, I think here is an opportunity for the council, with its own expertise, to work with DOC to try and make this work better, more effectively. If the company has been nationalised by the Tories, it may be an opportunity for this council, as a public entity, to work with colleagues in DOC to make this project actually work better than it has been working for the last 10 years. I'm not criticising the people involved. There are good people involved, but in terms of the deadline of 2050, 10 years has gone by. I think we need to make a lot better progress than we have been, and this should be seen as an opportunity for constructive engagement with the government.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And just back to the refresh itself, I think obviously we support the focus areas, mobilise for action, maintaining the gains, innovating for eradication, and preparing to accelerate. I think they're all very good directions to take, and we obviously support them in our own work. And I will just say, because I've heard a bit of criticism of the NETA of late, but if you look back at our natural environment targeted rate report from last year, we are in 1 year over 52,000 hectares of possum-based control. We've got 649 low-incident pest plant infestations. We've got 2,800 hectares of pest plant control. You've got, the list goes on and on, right across our islands, right across all our reserves. We've got hundreds of thousands of dollars going to community groups, mana whenua groups, to increase the focus. Obviously, the 1080 campaigns. You've got big increases of biodiversity, lizards, birds, everything popping up all around our urban areas, not just our reserves and sanctuaries. It's pretty phenomenal. And on the North Shore, this year we've had a flock of kiriru, about 18, 20 of them, right in Birkenhead, which I saw with my own eyes, which I've never seen before in my life. We've got kaka last week in Birkenhead, Beach Haven and Takarunga in Devonport. And then, of course, the experiences we've had recently with the kiwi on Waiheke, the Hihi Shakespeare, I think on Tiritiri, 277 chicks born, which is just sort of outrageous. We're running out of room for them. And then you go down through Hunua, and the great successes with the kōkako program over a long time have meant that other sanctuaries around the country will be receiving kōkako, who will then help those other sanctuaries around the country do, as Chris Darby says, that the significant work across New Zealand. So we do need to strengthen our submission to ensure that we are including the biodiversity of the whole of the country, not just Auckland, but I think the Auckland focus is good. But my concern is, as we've all said here today, the refresh does not connect with what's happening with the funding. The doc team, I sat on the boat on the ferry with them to Waiheke, and I know a number of them. $5 million they're having to save already this from the last budget, which has meant significant reduction in staff and future staff. And then you've got this 2050, which I think surprised everyone, being reduced. And sadly, this is another thing that seems to be taking a political left and right spin, whereas this was set up by John Key's government. This was a clear economic, environmental, social, positive thing for the country and the city that is going to be languishing. With the Jobs for Nature funding coming to an end, I have real concerns about the gains that we've made as a city and as a country. So it is a bit about face. It does not make sense to me that you would start to reduce these types of funding and reduce the ability to actually do what everyone in the city wants, I think, more focus on environment. It does not need to be a political issue. Right, so all those in favour? Any opposed? No, thank you. Right, we'll move to item 13. I'll move. Second, Councillor Sayers. All those in favour? Item 14, summary. Oh, I didn't do 12. Apologies, I went straight to the wrong page. Sorry, Robert and Catherine, sitting there patiently so long, we miss you. I'll move this one, and Deputy Chair will second. Robert and Catherine, thank you. Turn the page too quick, apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take my report as read and just make a couple of comments before I hand over to Catherine to discuss the main submission points. The scope of this legislation is very narrow. It only applies to the projects that are listed in the schedule. And so because the scope of the legislation is narrow, so is the scope of the submission. But I'll just make the point that there is a broader PWA, Public Works Act Amendment Bill coming very soon, possibly as soon as July. So if there are concerns or feedback relating to the PWA that members have that is broader than what is covered under this bill and this submission, then we would obviously recommend that that waits for the submission on the second bill, which will not be very far away. So having said that, I will hand over to Catherine, whose team has led the writing of the submission, to take you through it.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Catherine Hickling. I'm Associate General Counsel for the Property Law team here at Auckland Council. And today we're talking about the Public Works Critical Infrastructure Amendment Bill. And as Robert has pointed out, this is a bill that's very limited in its scope. It's intended to enable specific projects that are large public infrastructure projects to be progressed as quickly as possible, given that they have existing designations, trying to cut down on the possible duplication in processes with the Public Works Act and the Environment Court processes. So it is limited in scope, it's tight in timing. The submission is due tomorrow. As Robert said, there will be further reform that's coming, and I'm certainly very interested in that, and I imagine Council will be as well, so please watch this space, and we're keen to understand what impact we can make with that. So the trade-offs with this are a faster PWA process for certain projects in return for additional compensation payments to landowners and an internal objection submission process instead of the Environment Court. So affected landowners will have the ability to make submissions to the requiring authority or acquiring authority instead of being able to go to the Environment Court. And they will still have the right to bring a judicial review for a decision on points of process. So just moving on to the limited points that we're wanting to make on this. Firstly, it's about the scope. So at the moment, the bill is proposed to be very limited in scope. If that changes, we would like the ability to review those changes and potentially make further comment. It's also suggested that it might be appropriate for the streamlined process to apply to projects that have designation over part of the project properties, because some projects, for example, the level crossing projects across Tamaki Makaurau, there might be designations over parts of those and not all of the project. Also with timeframes, at the moment, if submissions are made to the acquiring authority, we've got 10 working days to respond to them. That seems probably quite unworkable, so we're recommending that that be increased to 20. We're pointing out a few things. For example, the Select Committee needs to be really careful in its analysis of whether the benefits of the faster process, one, will be realised, and two, will outweigh the proposed submission process reducing landowners' rights to natural justice and increasing, potentially acquiring authorities' risk of judicial review. So the anticipated benefits are untested and may not eventuate. The additional compensation that is payable, the bill specifically excludes councils as landowners from being paid that additional compensation. So our recommendation is that additional compensation should be payable to all landowners who are affected. We, in collaboration with Auckland Transport, as this is a group submission, are proposing that the bill is amended to clarify the extent of the designation that's required for a project. So very similar to the partial point that we made earlier. Also, the effective date for consideration of the additional compensation. There's a risk currently that owners who think that they might be entitled to some more compensation will delay the process until the bill is enacted to try to avail themselves of the additional compensation. So there's a suggestion that the additional compensation be paid to an owner if they would have qualified for it at the time the bill was introduced to Parliament, to try to mitigate against that potential for things to be blown out just because people are waiting. And then finally, Section 185 of the Resource Management Act applies and allows people to apply to the Environment Court to require the authority to acquire all of their land if they think that the proposed impact of a designation means that they can't reasonably use their land and or they can't sell it for market value, taking into account if the designation wasn't there. So those should be excluded. If landowners are wanting or requiring authority to buy all of their land, we're not doing it because we have asked to do it. We're not doing it because we need it quickly, and the benefits for the faster process aren't there for the requiring authorities, so it's proper that those should be excluded. So those are the main points for this. As again, this bill is limited in its scope. We're really interested in the further reform that's coming. For council parent group doesn't have any projects listed that are directly impacted for us. Auckland Transport has 3 where they're named and a number of others where they're working in collaboration with NZTA.
Thank you. I think the submission is quite clear, but there are 3 questions so far. And I think the mayor just asked me a question. I'll just clarify who pays the money. Would that be the proposer of the project?
That's right.
Thank you, Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora, thank you. First up, do you have any sense of whether the next round of reform is going to echo this, or are we looking at something potentially quite different?
Through the chair, the next round of reforms have been clearly signalled, and they do include some similar provisions to these, but also other ones. So the next round of reforms are far broader and will apply to all Public Works Act acquisitions.
Cool. I think it will be really important in that preparing for that process that we consider some of the recovery office implications. Interested to. I think that might be worthy of a workshop, Chair, when we get further down the track on that one. The other thing that I was interested in was the challenge to natural justice from the lack of an appeal right, other than to right only to the acquiring authority, which kind of feels like going back to the person who's already made the decision to say, I think you got it wrong, as opposed to having an independent arbiter. So is that, I mean, you seem to have picked up on that on what we've got here, but I wondered if you didn't mind just expanding a little bit more on whether that's something of, you know, like, does this set a precedent for other things if this goes through, or if you could just expand on that bit a little bit more, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, good question. And through the chair, the principles of natural justice, which are set out in the Bill of Rights Act, include the right to be heard, the right to impartiality, and other things like that. So with the process being brought back in-house to the entity that's making the decision, there will be a need for that entity to establish a process that clearly shows that they are following the processes of natural justice and allowing people time and space to have their views heard. The submissions are only going to be written. People will not have an opportunity to appear in person. Against that, though, is the fact that for these projects, they will have undergone the Resource Management Act designations process, which for projects of this size and scale, we would expect will have meant that stakeholders will have had an opportunity to be heard in that forum. So partly it is intended to stop what's seen as duplication of process, which extends timeframes unnecessarily.
Thank you. So would there then be, so in terms of that, the acquiring authority being required to clearly show that they are doing a proper second look, if you like, does that mean they'll have to, create a second decision-making body to look at it, or will it still be the same people, the same positions looking at it? How will that play out?
Thank you, and I understand your question. And through the chair, it's not specified how that happens. It is specified that the authority will need to take into account the same things that the Environment Court would have had to have taken into account, So in terms of the considerations, there is some specificity there, but there isn't any in terms of the process. So that will be up to each authority to establish a process that best balances what is trying to be achieved and the risks that are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Member Henare.
Kia ora. Given that anything to do with the Public Works Act and Māori, there is a long history of how Māori have been diddled out of their land interests. I see that there's a term protected Māori land in the proposed bill. Is there anywhere in the bill or attached to the bill that sets out what actually is protected Māori land, even though that 100 years ago we all thought it was, but it wasn't? So.
Kia ora, Member Henare, and through the chair again, there isn't, but the term protected Māori land is, to my knowledge, well understood, and it is defined in the Infrastructure Finance and Funding Act. So the understanding of the meaning of that phrase, I think, is clear, even though it isn't specifically redefined in the bill or the Act.
Would you, in the course of writing the submission, do you think it's appropriate to have some sort of point about what is protected Māori land? You know, if there is any past jurisprudence on it?
We can absolutely make that point in the submission if that's what Council would like us to do. I think that the meaning of protected Māori land is clear, and I know that as part of the Cabinet papers, they were reviewed by Te Tare Whakatau, so the Office of Treaty Settlements, and with the exclusion of protected Māori land, their view was that the bill could be implemented in a way that was consistent with the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. But if it's the view of this council that we would particularly like to make that point and have that definition clearly in there, then we can do that.
Last question, and given that it's a really, really short space of time to work with, and given that the government of the day failed to talk to Māori about what was or what their thinking was, or even what was going to be in the bill, at some stage, is council going to do the same thing as the Crown and ignore Māori? Or are we going to engage with Māori? I mean, I only say this, and it's not because Māori are asking for any favours, but we do have a history of the use of a Public Works Act. So
that's probably beyond what I can comment on here, Member, but
I think, and I did bring this up at the pre-agenda, the purposeful non-mentions of Te Tiriti in the bill and how we can strengthen not just the proposed Māori land, you know, have what would normally be in all legislation, which would be considerations of Treaty of Waitangi. So if it would help to add a C around and I'm doing this on the fly, an explanation of protected Māori land and add a clause on concerns around the what am I trying to say? The non-mention of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Would that work, Member Henare? Sorry, Member Henare. Member Henare. No, sorry. I'm just asking if that would work, adding the submission should include a full description of proposed Māori land, what our expectation is, and also
Yeah, no, I get where you're going. Look, I don't think that Haukura is in a position on this submission. So knock yourselves out, do what you want to do. We might just sit this one out for a whole lot of other reasons that I can't go into here.
Yeah, exactly. Fair enough. And I think once again, this is, I think it happened 2 meetings ago where the speed of the considerations are not what we expect or hope for when, even if they are what the government would call minor changes to a bill. But yeah, maybe we'll continue to think about that one. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Just following up on the section of the submission to do with objections and submissions, and this particularly as it goes to this requirement where any challenge you have to appeal to the acquiring authority proposing to acquire the land. At the very least, that's always going to have the perception of conflict of interest, isn't it? So irrespective whether they set up some paper wall or something, as far as the affected parties go, there's going to be a sense that we're appealing to the people who are proposing to do that, which seems almost farcical. Do you think we can? Yeah, I mean, it's been articulated pretty clearly. Do you think we can make that stronger, even? Given if you read guidelines from the Auditor General and whatnot, they're always big on perceptions of conflicts of interest as much as real conflicts of interest.
Kia ora, Councillor Watson. Thank you for the question. And through the chair, we can make that point more clearly if that is what this council would like us to do. The perception, as you rightly point out, is very hard to avoid a perception of conflict when you have the decision maker also the only entity that appeals on substance can be made to. But do take into account also that these will have gone through the Resource Management Act designation process and all of the notification and other procedural steps that entails.
Thank you. Just a little bit of explanation, please, in terms of the inconsistency with the principles of natural justice, the right to notice and to be heard. Is that the right to be heard literal, i.e. speaking as opposed to writing something? Is that what it means under the Bill of Rights?
I would need to go away and look at the exact wording, but my understanding is that the principle, the right to be heard is a general one and not specific to verbal.
Okay, and just the reason I bring it up is that some of us had, experience with the last government with those fast track process, and certainly the notion amongst the communities that were affected in one particularly graphic case was they had a feeling it was just a tick box exercise. Everything was at this distance. No people were turning up. They wrote in there a little bit. They'd asked the councillors to have a bit. So there's a real distrust in this kind of sort of closed shop that goes down to Wellington or wherever it might be. So I just make that on the basis of that experience, in the previous term. Thank you.
Good points, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Fully.
Kia ora, thank you. And my apologies if this question's already been asked. In the submission under the objections and submissions on page 8, because I echo the concerns others have made about breaching the principles of natural justice, potentially. I would have preferred for us to say that we oppose then that part of the bill, because I would personally, I'd prefer for it to actually remain with the Environment Court, because that gives landowners an objective judicial body to go to, you know, to challenge a decision, as opposed to coming to a political body of learned folk, but not necessarily learned in the law or in judicial processes. Is it possible to strengthen that and make it we oppose, or is it your advice not to put that down? Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Fully, thank you for that. And through the chair, it is possible to make that submission, but if that was the case, it would render the bill fairly ineffective, because that's the main driver of it, to decrease the delays, essentially, that can be caused through objections to the Environment Court for these projects that are perceived to be regional or national significance, that have gone through a rigorous Resource Management Act process already. So if we did that, it, in my view, would mean that we are opposing the bill in its entirety, because that's pretty much the key point in it.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but perhaps if we could make a stronger sentiment then about why it is that we don't necessarily think the benefits outweigh what we're paying, the costs of that. Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor, I think we can have that in the submission. It's a bit of a, in my opinion, a grey area, because through the fast track, we opposed the fast track, but we actually supported it for public infrastructure projects like this. So it's a bit of a, we have said we do want, you know, faster, more affordable, large projects that community benefit from. So, but I think it's right that we can put that, how the, I guess, the process for the public through this, how we maintain fairness through it, rather than just railroading such. Mayor Brown.
I've just got a copy of the submission to plough through, and it looks reasonably benign. There's two things important about a submission. One is the information, which is mostly right, and the other one's the tone, because we don't want to be overly aggressive about this. They are trying to do something which could be useful to us, and particularly some of the projects that we are particularly keen on, Northwest Busways and things like that there. But so, I want to make sure that somebody who signs us off just checks it for tone, because we have had some in the past where we've said the same thing in a way that pissed people off, as opposed to we could say the same without doing it. And the second thing is one or two of those some of those projects in that thing there are ones that we all absolutely love, and the other ones we're not quite so mad about. Does this reduce our ability to perhaps have input into the designs and impacts of some of those projects, or not? Or should we ask for to make sure we still have, I mean, these are all some projects within the bounds of this city, and we've handed over too much authority for Wellington to decide bits and pieces about us without having our own input in the past, and I don't want that to carry on. So and one or two of those are quite querulous ones. Not some people in the room like some of them, some don't like some of them, but how do we get across our ability to maintain the ability to still have an input in some of these?
Thank you. Your Worship, and through the Chair, this is specifically the land acquisition process.
Well, but the thing is that if you don't know what the thing's going to be exactly right, how do you buy the right land? Or if they buy the certain land, that sets a direction for a process that may or may not be what we want to see happen. And so, we just spent an hour or two, a few minutes ago, getting rid of land that somehow or other we didn't want. Now, I don't want this to happen again. We only want to buy land, them to buy land, which we both agree is useful to all parties. And so I want some question to make sure, some submission in there that says we want to have a bit of a say about this. Because they buy up a whole lot of stuff there that cements in a dumb project. And there's plenty of evidence for that. Thank you.
Through the Chair, if I could just help to answer. Firstly, there's probably two main ways as council that we can have involvement. One is through our regulatory role, and as Catherine has said, these projects will have gone through the notice of requirement designation kind of process through council. So we have a role as a regulator to process that. This is kind of the next step on from that. The second way that we can be involved is obviously as council, as we work directly with ministries or the developers, but mainly NZTA, say for transport, where we can be involved in working groups and provide both feedback and endorsement, various things that we can on these big projects. So neither of those roles change through this submission. My view is that this part of the process is probably not the time where we will have needed to have a look at those matters that you're talking about earlier on, either as a regulator or as a partner in the city. So I'm not sure that I know exactly what you're saying. I'm just not sure that there's particular room to put that into this particular submission.
I think, and before I go to Councillor Newman, I think there's a sentence we can add that doesn't need to be in the resolutions that just says this is not, our submission is not necessarily an endorsement of any particular project or the way it's done, and expect normal consultation or normal, I don't know, there'll be a better, but it just signifies in the submission that if someone looked at the list of projects and looked at the submission, it's not an endorsement of exactly how all of these projects will roll out or something like that. Mate.
Well, I'm just mindful of the fact that in the last government plonked down a whole lot of planning corridor stuff for a non-existent light rail, which was then going to go under the ground anyhow. And fortunately, it never got anywhere. But it took us a while to get rid of that as well. We still are fighting our way through these things. So there has to be something or other there that says we generally applaud the idea of what the aims of this, but there's no way that I want to have to untangle some mess because someone in Wellington has plonked a whole lot of land purchases across something which you're not entirely happy about.
We'll make that clear. Thanks. Councillor Newman.
Just to be clear, the responsible agency is the acquiring authority, isn't it? The acquiring authority that's buying the land. So I'm not quite sure why we would be desperately concerned if KiwiRail or NZTA is the requiring authority buying the land, because it's them, not us, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the only concern that I would have, which may align with where the Mayor is at, from a council perspective, is where the requiring authority is Auckland Transport in relation to the land acquisition around the AT projects that are set out in the schedule in the bill, correct?
That's right, for this phase of the reforms.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So does this mean that potentially we would be making decisions on whether we take people's houses?
Through the Chair, for the requiring or acquiring authorities who have projects, yes.
Okay, I mean, I'm not comfortable doing that. Yeah, so I would support along the lines of what Councillor Fully was raising. So, I mean, is everyone else comfortable to make decisions if we take someone's house?
We do, I guess, we already do that
Okay.
on a number of projects. But Catherine, if maybe we could explain how it would actually roll out, say in tomorrow or next budget we approve a new project that requires this, and making space for water maybe a number of others which we already would do. How would that roll out? Would it end up sitting literally on our desk to go 308 Smith Street and wherever we are purchased?
Thank you, Chair. And Megan, if you have corrections to my understanding of the RMA aspects of the project, please jump in. But for a start, these are limited to the projects that have been listed, and there aren't any that are in Auckland Council parent's name. But for a project, it would need to have gone through the notice of requirement stage under the Resource Management Act and through the designation process under the Resource Management Act. Then it would come under the Public Works Act process, where if land is needed to be acquired for a public work, the acquiring entity needs to have gone through an options analysis to determine which land has to be acquired, why it has to be acquired, why this land, not that land. Notices need to have been served, and people will have had an opportunity to signal their intent to make a submission, and they will have made a submission to the acquiring authority. The acquiring authority will need to consider that submission and will have needed to have taken into this account the same factors that the Environment Court takes into account when it hears objections, and it will need to make a decision. And then if the affected party thinks that the decision was made wrongly on process, they will be able to commence a judicial review of that decision.
Just through the chair, these are the powers that council has currently. But as Catherine said, the particular projects we're looking at that relate to this change to the law, there are two where Auckland Transport would be that authority, but none that council parent would be.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll get you both to move back off the table. Thank you very much. Councillor Newman in the debate.
Chair, I firstly, as the requirement states, there's still the process to go through which allows for people to have their say through that, which is not changed. The premium payments and the recognition payments here are really good because it gives people the ability to get on with their lives, which is what a lot of affected landowners want. I was door knocking up in my ward the other day in Manukau in relation to property owners around what will be the Mill Road corridor. They are desperate for certainty so they can get on with life, and I wish that this had been available to them sooner. I think that this is a really, well, I get some of the concern, but I think that if a acquiring authority, which is not an Auckland Council, wishes to proceed, and that there are people who want to get on with their lives, and that this is a way to do that, and that's good. I think that those who are concerned about the taking of someone's house, that's been something that has been a prospect under the Public Works Act for decades and decades and decades. But this infrastructure is important. Most of it's going to be delivered by agencies, requiring authorities that are not Auckland Council, Auckland Transport, and I actually think that this is a bill which should be celebrated, not opposed. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fully.
Yeah, just, that was quick. Thank you. Look, I accept what, Councillor Newman has said about that, but fundamentally I'm concerned about, it's not about the taking of the houses, because I accept that that already exists under the Public Works Act, but it's the fact that landowners who do object, because there will be people who want to get on with their lives, that's true, but there will also be people who will be very upset that their homes are being taken off them, and they will see it as being taken off them by force, and they will want a way to object where they will feel that they can be heard and heard in a proper manner that's impartial by an impartial judicial officer. I think that that's why this exists in the first place. That's why, generally speaking, across most of our decision-making processes, there is an avenue for people to appeal to an objective third party, usually a judicial officer with some very strong legal background and knowledge of the law. And I think that this breaches that. So just fundamentally, that doesn't sit right with me, the breaches of those principles of natural justice, which are, one of the foundations of our legal system. So that's the only thing that I've got to say. I mean, I know that the government probably will just push it through anyway, like most things this term, but I did just want to express that concern. So it's not about the fact that the Public Works Act already gives us the power, or Auckland Transport the power to take people's homes in order to do important work, but it's about that process of eliminating the ability for landowners who do object at their homes being taken to a judicial forum that is impartial. I am happy that we're not going to be involved, that it'll be Auckland Transport that has to do that. But then there's the wider, what about every other council that will be affected by that? So I just wanted to voice that. Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Mr. Chair, I suppose it's a comment, but maybe a question if you could answer it. It's just triggered my thoughts to how would this work under managed retreat if there was people in an area that we identified that didn't want to go, and we could force them out. Can I just be assured that the overlap isn't?
We're probably outside of questions, but definitely this only relates to those projects listed, and managed retreat process we don't have, apart from the buyouts, which was not supposed to create precedent, and we're still waiting on the government to understand what a managed retreat process for any community would be. Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Right. All those in favour? Aye. Any opposed? Cool. Councillor. Okay, Councillor Foley would like to oppose and Councillor Bartley would like to abstain. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair. OMSB members abstain. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Right. I did make the mistake earlier of thinking we might have been able to get through before lunch. So we'll just quickly do these two, and then we'll go to lunch for half an hour, and then we'll come back for the... Oh, we did 13. Item 14, I'll move. Deputy Mayor will second. All those in favour? Anyone opposed? No. Right, we'll move to close this part of the meeting. Going into confidential. Councillor Ferry and would like to move to confidential. I saw you put your hand up last time, so sorry. Throw you there. I'll second. All those in favour? Any opposed? No. Thank you. Right. The live stream is off. Yeah, so we'll come back at 1:36. I see that I think someone I saw someone bring a sandwich out, Councillor Walker, before, but there are sandwiches out there for anyone who would like them. And we'll be back in 30 minutes. Thank you.